a look. Firstly, so the first dot point is reproduction, and our inquiry question is, how does reproduction ensure the continuity of species? This is basically what everything comes down to, the continuity of species. Really, really important. It's a really important concept, and I just want to make sure that I highlight that. So essentially with every dot point, rather with every dot point, for example, like reproduction and then genetic variation and so on, they give you an inquiry question, and essentially your aim should be to go through all the points that are listed underneath the syllabus, get all the information, and then once you are done, you should be able to come back to answer this inquiry question. This is the big question that you should be able to answer once you've studied everything under a certain dot point. So a really good way to test yourself is to basically phrase this as a question, and then this could probably be like a 9 marker or something, and then you go under and then you go through every little or rather with every you go through every dot point underneath this main question. So in terms of module 5, right, so this is, remember, again, a quick summary. So we've got reproduction, we then look at cell replication, DNA polypeptide synthesis. So it's like we start off with a big concept, we look at the smaller sort of part of it, how does it actually happen, what is the relevance of it, and again, how does it happen, and then we link it to the bigger picture here. So we are looking at how traits are passed from a generation to a generation on a system, cellular, and molecular level. So this is so we look at these system levels, and then we look at a cellular and a molecular level. So remember, we are considering how genetic information stored as DNA is expressed as external traits, and then we look at how does variation actually happen in populations, and then how we can trace this variation within populations to gather data and to then act upon that data. So let's talk about firstly reproduction. So you looked at animal, so you looked at external and internal fertilization in animals, would have looked at asexual reproduction, which includes vegetative propagation and apomixis. And apomixis in plants, and also sexual reproduction. So you should essentially know. Apologies, I've just got a bit of a sore throat, so if I cough and sneeze in this lecture, please excuse me. So I was just saying, for example, with animals where you looked at internal and external fertilization, you should obviously know what the process is, and you should be able to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of each. Same thing with plants, and you want to know examples, for example, of plants that of like more popular methods of asexual reproduction versus sexual reproduction and how that occurs. You would have looked at fungi, and within that talked specifically about the processes of budding, spores, and fragmentation in asexual reproduction, and you would have also looked at sexual reproduction. Protists, so be able to talk about the processes of binary fission and budding as forms of asexual reproduction, and also the method for sexual reproduction. And finally, in bacteria, the only method of reproduction is binary fission, which is asexual. So in terms of looking at asexual versus sexual reproduction and looking at some advantages versus disadvantages, just a very brief summary. Remember, it's a very quick review of module 5. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go through all of it in a lot of depth. We did that in the last lecture series, so maybe check that out. But yeah, I'll just quickly go through some advantages and disadvantages very quickly. So the advantages of asexual reproduction are that it's quick, there isn't a requirement for mates, it isn't an energy intensive process, nor is there a requirement to care for the offspring. The advantages of sexual reproduction is that it leads to the production of new alleles, which then also contributes to variation, and it gives individuals the ability to adapt to their environment and hence aid in natural selection. Disadvantages of asexual reproduction are that firstly, clones, because it leads to the production of clones, there is a lack of diversity. It also leads to reduced adaptive abilities, and individuals are more susceptible to large-scale extinction events because of that lack of variation. The disadvantages of sexual reproduction is that it is time intensive, it is energy intensive, it does require mating, and it also leads to fewer offspring. So it's kind of like the opposite of the advantages of asexual reproduction. Okay, just give me 1 minute to grab some tissues, and I'll be back. Alright, I am back. Apologies for that. Okay, here we go. Now let's have a look at reproduction in mammals. So this is where we would look at the process of fertilization and implantation. You want to know what those processes are, and you want to know the structures that are involved. So fertilization is the fusion of gametes to initiate the development of a new organism, right? And it takes about 12 to 24 hours, and this is where fertilization is the fusion of the egg and the sperm. Implantation is when the fertilized egg actually adheres to the wall of the uterus. And when it adheres to the wall of the uterus, we then start calling it a blastocyst. And the process of hormonal control in this whole process is looking at the role of the endocrine system in basically controlling the whole process of pregnancy. So this is where this information comes into use. We essentially use this knowledge of fertilization, implantation, and the role of hormones in this whole process, and the significance of these hormones, to then manipulate this process. And by manipulating this process, it can essentially lead to desired outcomes that we want, and that can have a huge social effect and a huge social and economical impact as well. And this is used in selective breeding, in a process called selective breeding, where we essentially apply this knowledge. So what we do is that we know that in order for pregnancy to occur, the sperm needs to encounter the egg at a certain time. And what we do in order to then achieve that is that we time breeding so that it occurs during the intersecting fertility cycles. And we do that because we know that the phenotypic traits, for example, of two different organisms are heritable, so will be passed on to the offspring. And so to influence the traits of the livestock offspring, we either crossbreed or we purebreed. And this has actually led to the development of a lot of new species, including the Jersey or Angus cows. And there we have a photo. So this is essentially the two big parts of this first dot point of reproduction. We look at asexual versus sexual reproduction in a range of organisms, in a range of species, and then we essentially look at the process of fertilization, implantation in mammals, and we look at how that can be manipulated to achieve a desired effect, and we